Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with Cooper. Today we're looking at how Molina Healthcare created an end-to-end P2P process with some very impressive results, which we'll be looking at over the next hour. My name is Susie West and I am the CEO and founder at Shared Services Link, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this webinar today and presenting to you our main speaker, our central speaker, Mr. Bryce Berg, who is VP of Business Services at Molina Healthcare. And we'll also be joined by Jessica Warren, who is Senior Product Marketing Manager at Cooper Software. So how this is going to work for the next hour is I will be running through a number of slides, and then I'll be introducing Bryce, and the floor is really with Bryce today, and he's going to be walking us through for around 40 minutes through his case study experience of what they've been doing in finance and procurement in order to attain that alignment and achieve the state of end-to-end that we'll be examining. And I'll be chiming in and asking Bryce the occasional question on his experience and challenging him on certain data points that he presents. And then as we move towards Q&A in the last 10 minutes of this webinar, Bryce and both Jessica will be available to take your questions. So you, of course, do have a role to play, which is to make sure that you do get your questions answered today. We have a very, very positive attendance for this webinar, so it's obviously a very pertinent topic within the world of purchase to pay and shared services today. So do seize this opportunity to make sure that you get your questions answered. If this is the first time you've been on a Shared Services Link webinar, just post those through to me on the panel that you've got in your GoToWebinar panel, and I will put those questions to either Jessica or Bryce in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So do make sure you stay around for that. As far as the agenda for the next 60 minutes, as inferred earlier, I'll be touching on the context today with a couple of slides, and then be handing straight over to Bryce, who's going to be walking us through his story, and then we'll be looking at Q&A. So looking at the context for today, it does continue to be an issue as far as the alignment between procurement and finance. It was problematic 10 years ago, around the time that Shared Services Link actually set up. It became a key area of focus for Shared Services Link to be focusing on back then, and it continues to be an issue today. And we're all striving for end-to-end purchase to pay, and in order to do that, we need to have alignment within finance and procurement. They need to be sharing similar goals, similar KPIs, a similar vision, talking the same language. And this doesn't always happen. Even though we have the intention for this to happen, it doesn't always happen. And there is unfortunately a continuation of operating within silos, and that's very damaging for our processes, and it makes achieving that end-to-end process much more difficult. So alignment within purchase to pay can absolutely be a game changer. It has helped Molina Healthcare deliver very exciting results. So I'm looking forward to going into that story. Now, just before we do so, I'd like to ask the first out of two poll questions that we've got today. So coming up on your screen now is the first poll question, and this is with regards to the alignment that exists today between your finance and your procurement organization. So how would you rate the alignment between finance and procurement within your organization today? Would you say you're very aligned, both reporting to the same person? Mostly aligned, we have different reporting lines, i.e. reporting to two different people, but there is alignment in most ways or most other ways. We're somewhat unaligned. We sometimes collaborate on a number of projects, but we're mainly not aligned. We perhaps don't share KPIs, don't share a single vision, or not aligned at all. We work completely independently, so you don't come together really at all. Maybe you don't even really know the names of the of your opposite number within procurement or within finance. So if you could respond to that, and let's close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at the results coming up on the screen now. A little bit of a bell curve happening here, which probably isn't too much of a surprise. So let's start with the 39%. So 39% of you say that you're mostly aligned, but you have different reporting lines. I believe that is still very much a common practice today. 38% of you saying fairly unaligned. We only collaborate occasionally on some projects. Then followed by 13% of you saying really not aligned at all, really work very much independently. And 10% of you are in a very positive position where you're talking about being very aligned, and you actually, both functions actually reporting into the same person. So interesting stats to start off this case study presentation. So over to you, please, Bryce Berg from Molina Healthcare.
Thank you very much, Susie. I appreciate everyone's time today for letting me tell you the story about Molina Healthcare. First, a disclaimer, which is many of you and probably most of you have done procurement transformations in your organization. And this is a story that includes that, but that's not what makes this unique. I think probably a lot of you have been more successful in your procurement transformations. We're not complete, it's always a work in progress. But what does make this unique is the integration that we were able to achieve with accounts payable, the results from that, as well as the growth that we've had to manage along the way. So I'd like to introduce Molina Healthcare to you, since most of you haven't heard that. And let's talk about, first of all, Molina's journey. Well, I'll be able to tell you that story of where we started and where we are today and how we got all the bruises along the road to get here. It's certainly been a learning experience, as Susie mentioned, it being a case study that seemed a little bit analytical after walking the road. It seemed a little truer to life than being a case study, but hopefully we can present it like that and everybody gets some type of a takeaway that they can apply to their organization. I realize that not all of you are empowered to suddenly make these types of changes in your organization, but I think there's some lessons in here to where we all can make some changes in how we interact between procurement and accounts payable to improve some results. Molina Healthcare 35 years ago was founded by a physician, and that's important because we are still run by his son, who is a physician. And Molina is basically does government-backed healthcare insurance. It's a large company. Last year revenues over $14 billion. This year will be $17 billion. When the Fortune 500 rankings come out, we'll probably be about 225 this year. So a large company, but doesn't make a lot of money. Very, very narrow margins. So the role of procurement and controlling the cash flow out of accounts payable is very important. We've done 9 acquisitions in 2015. We had 2 years of 50% growth. Essentially, Molina Healthcare does the state-sponsored medicine for both at the federal level and the state level, mostly at the state level. We have about 4.3 million members now and about 20,000 employees. But again, the physician-founded and led is important because this is essentially a nonprofit organization that pays taxes. It's highly mission-oriented. So let's talk about yeah, go ahead.
I've actually got a question for you because you've got it looks like an aggressive M&A plan with 9 acquisitions taking place in 2015.
Yes.
That's just shy of 1 acquisition a month. So that's enough to send any shared services organization into a bit of a tailspin. So how does your P2P organization kind of manage with that high volume of M&A activity?
That's a great question. We've built it really with that in mind because this is not unique. Molina has grown by acquisition almost from the very beginning, and that's one of the the reasons why we created this organization, that we chose the platforms that we did. But essentially, we've built it up like a utility company, that as we add on new plans and new through these acquisitions, we just plug them into the central organization. And with the way we're able to leverage our volume, we might end up buying a plan which is, say, 100,000 members against our previous 3 million members. And at that point in time, it didn't really move the needle enough for us to even expand in procurement or accounts payable. We just suddenly had more users. We had standard training for them. We had a pretty set out format for how they would just integrate into the organization. So the short answer is we planned it from the beginning, and we're good at it because we do it a lot.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a kind of a templated way that you've got to bring on these newly acquired businesses and then integrate them and get everybody up to speed that need to be up to speed as far as training is concerned. Sounds like it's almost like systematic, and it's kind of sounds like it's almost running like a smooth machine.
It generally is, and it depends on the size of the acquisition, because our last acquisition we've not yet fully integrated, and that was our largest acquisition to date. It was 6,500 employees. So that one is taking a bit longer, but we will integrate them. But the other ones that are smaller, if we're bringing on a couple hundred employees, we just add them on as a new employee. Our company has grown so fast over the years, and we've added so many employees. I started here 6 years ago, and 6 years ago we had 3,000 employees. So you can see the scale of just the growth that's both inherent growth and then also acquisition growth.
You've also got 50% growth for the past 2 years. I mean, you're talking about growth there, compared to 6 years ago when you joined. And now that in this bottom bullet, you've got 50% growth in the past 2 years. I mean, this must be seriously stress testing your P2P organization. Again, how do you make sure that you don't constantly feel underwater with that level of growth?
It's about leveraging, because we're not managing transactions. We're managing vendor relationships. We're working on automating. We're data mining. We're doing things like that. And there are contracts, but what we're doing, we're all doing the same business in all of these different states and plans. So we're able to leverage existing agreements. So I don't have to go out and suddenly negotiate 20 new agreements for this plan that we just acquired. We can roll them into our existing software and other types of agreements. So it's really not as much work as it sounds.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Well, let's talk about the users, because that's where we focus, and it's where we failed, and it's where we decided to focus. So the users are all the folks that we're connecting with, and we're all, of course, familiar with our requisitioners and the employees in the company. But there's a lot of other users that we sometimes forget. I mean, the procurement folks are in fact users of our system, as well as the AP finance and our suppliers and IT. So whatever transformation you're making or changes you're making or processes you're setting, I think you have to be cognizant of all of these different users who have different needs within the systems and processes that you look at. And the other thing that's important to remember is the world that we live in now. Everybody wants to be empowered to do things themselves. So everyone is used to going on to the internet and being in a self-service world of where they can go to Amazon and get exactly what they want, and it shows up the next day. And due to that, their expectations are they can do the same thing at work. So that's the type of experience that we need to provide them. So and back to your question, Susie, on how do we manage this growth? It's to have easy to use tools. If we're putting out tools there that are horribly complex to use, then that growth would have killed us. So it's how we do that is pretty important. Why don't you go ahead and flip to the next slide here? There we are. The other part here is leveraging your suppliers. Again, we talked about that scale that we had and being able to manage that growth. We had to pick suppliers that could grow that fast with us. If we, and that was part of our challenge, was then take, the suppliers that weren't keeping up, weeding them out and bringing in new suppliers that could scale with us. And then, being able to have that professional buyer when it's needed, because if, people can't always go out and get exactly what they want, or they're going to have a unique requirement. So making it easy to access that buyer is also important. Otherwise, then you start building up frustration of, I can't get what I want.
A couple of questions on that, Bryce. So what were your kind of key requirements that determined if a supplier could scale according to your growth plans?
Well, we had to make sure that they could serve really any state in the U.S. because we're, like I said, when I started here, I think we were in about 6 or 7 states. Now we're in 12 states, including a territory, plus another 5 states for a line of business that we acquired, and then our newest acquisition is in 30 states. So we really just needed to have suppliers that were national or had that reach. We also had to make sure they had the financial wherewithal to scale up. If we were going to somebody like a Dell corporation or EMC, some of these really large corporations, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they're so large. They can, of course, do all of that. Where it really became much more important was really at the smaller supplier level. And I've got some slides ahead that discuss about where your spend is with different suppliers. So that's really where we focused our energy, was on those smaller and medium suppliers that were supplying us on a national basis at the time, and determining if they could grow with us. And some of them were able to. We were able to give them sales projections, and they were able to scale their growth, the growth of their company to match that of Molina, and it's been a success story for both of us.
Great. So how would you define the general response from the suppliers that you were asking to come on this journey with you?
I'd say generally they've been very happy because of the phenomenal growth that they've seen in their business in serving Molina. We're not, we negotiate hard because we don't make much money. Our profits last year were 1%. So we do negotiate hard, but we do recognize that suppliers need to grow their business. They need to make some money. If they're not making money, they're not going to be interested in serving us. So we try to come to fair agreements, but that are still financially beneficial, for Molina and competitive in our marketplace.
Good. Thank you.
So back to our user. It all starts with that user and that experience. And remember, they all need something to get their job done. So what we were able to do was take our procurement platform and make that, we internally called it, the software itself is Coupa, but we relabeled it internally as iRequest because I need something. It was another name we thought it was I need, and we changed it to iRequest. It sounded a little better, but it's about going to one place to get something that I need. And within our system, we've, have all different types of forms that people can fill out. I need a company credit card. I need a check request. I need to get some volunteer time off approved. So all different things, but they're going to one central location in order to be able to fulfill that need, or at least submit that requisition for that need. I had mentioned the suppliers, and it's easy to to go to somebody like Dell, and they're already large enough that they can scale with you no matter how large you get. But in most of us, and I have a slide here on the Hackett group that they provided, and it basically states the Pareto ratio, that it's an 80-20 proposition. 20% of your suppliers are providing 80% of the spend, or that's where 80% of the spend is going. And so you're chasing mostly after that, that 80% of the suppliers on, the other side. Why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide? I have that one. But as we're seeing here, you're going to spend most of your time on that 80% of the suppliers just on the administration. So what we've tried to do is, again, consolidate some of the smaller suppliers and push that number down to have a much smaller number of suppliers. And unfortunately, you're always going to be faced with niche suppliers who are small companies, so you have to figure out how to do business with them. But in the sense of efficiency, you want to try and enable them to interact with you on an efficient basis, and when possible, consolidate some of those niche suppliers.
So, Bryce, how have you got on with your consolidation? Because I guess kind of consolidating your supplier database is always a bit of a moving kind of feast, if you will, because with the 9 acquisitions that took place in 2015, right, you'll, I imagine, be taking on some new suppliers. I mean, what is the rough percentage of new suppliers that you would take on with an acquisition? Is it maybe 10% of their existing supplier base? Is it none? Is it more than 10%?
It's low. It's probably in that 10% range because we take a fairly firm approach to it. Whenever we're doing an acquisition, of course, the folks who are at that facility, think that their suppliers are the best in the world and have served them for years, and there's great benefit in keeping that supplier. But we've come in with a fairly firm hand and said, no, this is Molina's national supplier. I know you love your local IT guy, but this is who Molina uses, and you've been purchased, and this is who you're going to use. If they don't meet your needs, please let us know, and we'll make sure that they do. And if they don't, then we'll make a change.
And given all of that, what's your kind of consolidation journey looked like in the last few years? Have you kind of shrunk it quite radically, and have you got it to a place now where you think it's pretty stable, or is there further consolidation to take place?
It balances, because we're always running across new, unique needs, and there's always a new software that somebody in the organization needs. So we are always starting up new relationships, and it can be significant. We're investing in a new medical management software now, which is millions of dollars. Well, it's a brand new relationship, a brand new supplier, and it's a significant one. But we're going to then phase out the relationship we have with the existing supplier over time. For that software and the other replacement. But there's many times new needs that come up, and you don't have a one-to-one replacement. So I'd say overall our supplier list has grown, and when we started our transformation, we were able to shrink it down a bit, and then over the past 4 years it has grown as the company's grown, but it hasn't grown as fast as the company's grown, and neither has procurement, and neither has accounts payable. So yes, it has grown, but it's still very manageable. I think we have probably 2,000 suppliers that are listed and active, and out of that, we really have probably 50 core suppliers that we're, that's in that top 20%. So we've been able to narrow that down pretty well.
So that sounds like a nice lean kind of supplier base and very manageable. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. All right, why don't we move on here? And I think we talked about a fair bit on this slide. Again, this is from the Hackett Group and providing some metrics for where the top performance companies are and where the averages are. And so we'll move on to the next one. When we chose our procurement system, procure-to-pay system, I should say, there's really a couple choices out there in the market. There's several good ones. But one thing we wanted to make sure was that we could interact with them on really kind of a free market basis. Because again, going back to that 80% of the suppliers that were there, trying to enable them on a closed network was going to be a lot more work than we were able to do. We implemented our software by ourselves. We had probably one person from IT that helped us with the interfaces to the ERP. We had a project manager from Coupa who assisted us, and then it was my buying staff of about 11 people at the time that implemented the procurement solution, plus the AP staff working on implementing the procurement, the payment side. But it was just really one person from the AP side working on the implementation side. So we were very lean, and we didn't want to go through an enablement of 1,000 suppliers. We needed something that all of our suppliers could just connect to. I'm also kind of a firm believer that despite marketing, if you have a supplier on a closed market and they're paying a fee to use that closed market, it ends up in your pricing. That's maybe a personal bias, and there are many people who can argue that one point one way or the other, but that was my bias and assumption when I went into it. So I didn't want a closed network.
How long did it take you to make the decision to go with Coupa? Was it a decision that you were poring over for, some people can take kind of 9, 12, 18 months to make decisions over a solution like this. Others can take a lot less time. What was your time frame?
From the time we identified and got the approval for creating a P2P environment and getting the approval to put a tool on top of our ERP, we probably took about 4 months, 3 to 4 months. From the beginning, from inception to signing the deal, I'd say it was 4 months. One advantage in this company is that it's pretty tightly controlled. I was working for, at the time, the chief accounting officer, who worked for the CFO, whose name is on the building. So it was a pretty short chain of command. And the chief accounting officer was empowered to make the decision of go or no go on adding on the P2P solution. So it was a pretty quick decision, but the evaluation between the suppliers, it did take some time because we did that in a very collaborative manner. I brought in the accounts payable folks who weren't part of procurement at the time, but we knew we wanted to do P2P and brought them into the evaluation process. So getting that, having additional people involved slowed the process down. I think we could have made it a bit faster if we'd kept it narrow. But we didn't. We spread it out, and we got the buy-in instead.
And you talked about the fact that Coupa, the solution that you ended up going with, didn't have a strategy for kind of high supplier fees, and supplier fees are either non-existent or low at their end. What were the other kind of key attributes that tipped you in their favor?
When it came down to it, it was the user interface. I had used e-procurement software since 2001, and at the very beginning of it, and actually even 2000, I think, was when we first did our first implementation at my previous company. And so we'd been using the same type of software for a long time, and I knew that that was the software that I wanted to buy when I got here because I'd use it, I knew it worked, but being a good procurement person, I said, well, we need to have some competition, and so I went out to the marketplace to see what was out there and what would fit the organization. Added Coupa to the list. And then saw a webinar with it, and it was the user interface that was the hook. That was what everyone who looked at the software and the usability of the software really liked. So that was, and based on our experience with our ERP, that was the highest rating on our scorecard. Where the most points were weighed on the evaluation was that user interface and usability.
What is the ERP that you use at Molina Healthcare?
We used JD Edwards. JD Edwards was, again, through this growth, we had a general ledger system when I first got here, Mass 2000 or something like that. So it was not even an ERP system. It was disparate, but through an acquisition that we made right as I got here, we needed a ERP system. So when I showed up, my boss had said, hey, I just bought an ERP system, and you get to implement it on the procurement module. So we spent 9 months doing that, which for an ERP implementation is pretty darn fast. So we got it up and stood it up in 9 months, and technically it was working on day one. We've spent now the next couple of years after that, tweaking it and making it really work.
That's good. Let's move on.
Yes. Okay, the open supplier network, I had mentioned that was, one of the requirements. And it's not just that they don't have to pay, it's that they can come however they want to it. Do they still want to receive a fax? Are they that small of a company that they want a fax? Do they want an email? Do they want CXML over a network? Or so having multiple types of ways to interact with the supplier and not having to go through an enablement of that supplier, just telling them, suddenly you're going to get a new format for the purchase order in the email. Instead of a Microsoft Word document or a J.D. Edwards PO, now you're going to get this new type of PO. So expect it. So that was about our communication with the suppliers. And we said, oh, by the way, there is this network available if you want to use it. And if you do, let us know, and we'll help you set up. There's no fees on it. And did some of that. We got some interest. There was not a lot of interest. Most of the suppliers really wanted to continue to do business that they were without having to connect to a network to do that. So when we started out, we had a pretty low take on that supplier adoption of the network. So why don't we move on and talk about the transformation and Molina's story here, starting in 2010. And I'm going to breeze through part of this because we've been discussing it a bit. But when I got here in 2010, it was a highly manual organization. Again, it was only 3,000 people, so we were using Microsoft Word and Excel for our procurement systems. The Microsoft Word documents were circulated around for approval, sometimes email. Then they had to get printed out and then signed by the chief accounting officer if they were over $200,000 and all of that. And then we were copying and pasting vendor quotes into Word templates to create purchase orders, then tracking them in Excel. And of course, that was completely disconnected from our general ledger system. So about as inefficient as you could possibly design something, and really no ability to scale because there was no way to leverage what was going on. And as we were growing, the shortcomings of it became more apparent because without that ability to scale, the complexity was increasing as well. The team that I started out with was a team of 6, so it wasn't a large staff. I was able to add on a couple of people after I got here, but not any great expansion for the amount of work that we had to take on. So again, the efficiency had to be built into what we were doing. So the first thing we did was to implement the ERP, and we did that. And after we implemented the ERP, we said, okay, great. Now we have everybody in the company can access the ERP, and they can submit their requisitions, and we're going to be more efficient than we were with this paper-based system. Well, in fact, we turned out to be much less efficient than with our paper-based system. When we started it out, we did all kinds of training. Our training department was all over it a month ahead of time. Everybody was having to take modules within the ERP and learning how to do requisitions and all of that. Well, once we started on this, the phone started ringing, and all of the people who were trying to figure out how to do this were calling for help. And they'd get it, and they'd be able to submit a requisition, and then the next time they needed to, and 2 weeks later, they'd forgotten how to do it because it was literally taking 12 to 14 clicks to submit a requisition. They had to know where to go, where to click, what field to enter what things in, and it was just not intuitive at all. I knew we were just dead in the water when the third time my head of software development called and said, hey, Bryce, could you walk me through this one more time? And so that was a big moment for us because we thought we had built in this with this distributed requisitioning and all of that, but our buyers were getting no work done because they were being a help desk for everybody trying to submit a requisition. So requisitioners were frustrated, and they started circumventing the system. They were out doing their own purchasing and submitting check requests. That existed already, but we saw that increase dramatically just due to the frustration level. We saw people using company credit cards. Again, they needed what they needed, and they were going to get it if we weren't going to help them. We had a process whereby we were scanning invoices instead of circulating the paper copies for signature. But the problem there was we had a pull system instead of a push. You had to go to a centralized SharePoint and pull down your invoice and print it and then put the cover sheet on it and then submit it to accounts payable. So obviously that's a bad plan because not everybody went to pull down their invoices. So then our suppliers started getting disgruntled and saying, hey, I have invoice out there, I sent it to you, and I'm not been paid, and but I delivered my goods. So we had problems. I went to my boss and I said, okay, we need to put a P2P solution on top of the ERP. And it needs to be easy to use. He said, well, we just implemented this ERP and I don't think it's the right time, and I really don't think that we should do that. So I said to my boss, I said, look, I bet you my job that we need an ERP, that we need a P2P on top of our ERP system. If it doesn't work out, you can fire me, no problem. I'll walk out the door. And he said, well, that's pretty bold. I said, yeah, I believe in it that strongly that we need that. And I said, by the way, if we don't, put in a P2P system, you're going to fire me anyway because it's not working. So that was kind of the turning point, and that's when we decided and started that 4-month clock we mentioned on picking a new P2P solution.
Great, a bold approach, and it sounds like it paid off, and we'll be looking at the stats shortly. Can you just walk us through so there's obviously been a very strong alignment, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail, between finance and procurement. Can you tell us a little bit, do they actually sit together physically within your organization? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So at that point in time, I was reporting to the Chief Accounting Officer, and Accounts Payable was reporting through Finance. And we ultimately reported to the same Chief Accounting Officer. So it was all within the finance organization. So they were more of a sister group to us, as opposed to a direct report up to the Chief Accounting Officer. So part of this P2P transformation was I said to my boss that I wanted Accounts Payable as part of this transformation to integrate them, and he thought I was kidding, and I said, no, we really want to do this. He said, you want to take on Accounts Payable? I said, yes, and explained the benefits to having them integrated into one group, and remarkably he agreed. As long as I was going, I thought I'd go big and ask for it all. So that I had the table set for what I thought we needed to do to be able to serve our internal customers, serve our members, and to be able to handle the growth.
And how long did that integration actually take for you?
Why don't we move on? I think I have some more information on that. We've got from the time we signed the contract until the time we went live, and we went live with full P2P, so there's a little bit of a delay, and then so it was 7 months to answer your question. We did some testing for the first month where we were sort of live, but went full live with the 300 suppliers and 4,500 users, because that was the employee count at the time. And our toughest part on this was not the software itself, not the Coupa platform. In fact, I signed a contract on a Friday, and on Monday I had the link for our instance at Coupa, and I was at a vendor presentation that day up in the Silicon Valley area, and was a little bored with where they were running off on all their technical details. So I sat down on my iPad and started configuring our new Coupa instance. I was able to, within an hour of sitting there, I was able to load a catalog, load a supplier, load addresses, and create a purchase requisition and move it into a PO. And I'm not the most technical guy who's out there. Obviously, we had to go and undo everything I did in configuring our new instance, but it was kind of that easy to get going with it. So that side of it was easy. Integrating into the ERP was hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it's a very kind of best practice route that you took here. So you went live in 7 months. You got your 300 suppliers live and your 4,500 users using this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we're going to touch on lessons learned shortly, but what would be the kind of the standout things that you said really made the key difference for you in your implementation?
In the implementation itself, it was, I think, the involvement of doing the implementation ourselves. In that we built it, we didn't bring in a consultant to do the implementation and finish it up and then hand us the keys to run. So since we were highly involved in building it, I think that led to our success in running it afterwards. I don't know that I would recommend not having any help like we did, because we could have saved some time and money, I think, if we'd had some help. But staying highly involved in that implementation, I think, would be very important. And underscoping the implementation with the ERP, because everybody talks about how easy that's going to be, and we have a standard format and such, but getting it done is a whole different world. So those were a couple of the big takeaways on the implementation side of it.
Let's just we actually have started having some questions coming through, and they're appropriate to ask now. So I'll go ahead first and ask now. So lots of questions on your ERP, just to make it clear to anyone that's missed any of the detail. So you guys have been using JD Edwards, and that's the tool that you integrated Coupa with. So you talked on. So one question is, what level of integration, or how many integration points are there between Coupa and JD Edwards?
We have it set up with, right now, with Flatfile integration. We run it every hour for going back and forth. The ERP is the system of record and where payments come out of. The procurement system is really run in parallel. Unfortunately, I think this is where having some consulting help would have helped us. We set up, and also being new to the ERP, we set up the JD Edwards and the Coupa to mirror each other, so that the Coupa comes in and populates the JD Edwards. So we have integrations into the procurement system, as well as back and forth, because the system of record for suppliers is also JD Edwards. So there's many integration points between the two systems, and but it's not dynamic. It runs every hour.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that maybe having some kind of support for some of the nuances of the implementation might have been good, but ultimately you had one person from IT working on the implementation from your end. Is that right?
Yes, because all IT needed to do was to build these interface files. And so we had one dedicated person. We had a project manager who was working on it as well, but really one dedicated person. And she wasn't even on for the whole 9 months. She spent about 2 months on the project.
Mm-hmm. So are invoices also processed in Coupa, or are they processed in JD Edwards? You kind of referred to it a little bit there. Can you just build on that?
Yeah, so we issue the POs out of Coupa. The other thing that we did back to adoption was we put a form in there for check requests, because we knew with the behaviors we had going on that everybody was doing their own purchasing and then submitting check requests. Well, we didn't want them to do that on a long-term basis, but with only 8 people and implementing a new system, I knew that I couldn't just shut that down and force everybody into the new Coupa system, because we'd have just gotten buried under the landslide. So we allowed that other avenue to be open, to continue to submit paper check requests, but we put a new form in Coupa for an electronic check request where you could attach the invoice, and it was much faster and easier. So people started using that, and then after about 2 months, we shut down the paper check requisition and said, there's an electronic one, go use that, but you can still do these check requisitions. So then what we did, we started seeing everything in one system, which is the first time we've ever seen that. So whether it was a check requisition or a purchase order, it all ran through Coupa, and at that point then we could start creating the payments out of Coupa. We don't actually issue payment out of Coupa. We create a ready to pay, and that ready to pay then pushes into the ERP system, and then JD Edwards makes the actual payment.
Okay, good. Now, you talked a little bit about your implementation team. So you were talking about the fact that you had one person from IT, I believe one person from procurement. Could you just kind of go into the detail a little bit more about the implementation team that you had for that 7-month period?
Right. Well, I was part of it, but not a hands-on technical. I had somebody I'd worked with at my previous employer who had done an implementation. He was in procurement, but he was highly technical, and he had done an implementation of an e-procurement system. We had gone from being a CD-based to cloud-based procurement, and then we had also added on another module. So he had a lot of experience in this. So he was really the lead for procurement, and he was able to go in and make configuration settings and work with IT. So he was very technical. We also hired a brand new college graduate who was not a computer science major. He was a business major, but he was computer savvy, and he became eventually our system administrator for it. But so he also helped. So really the two of them were pretty close to full-time dedicated on this. I was there to help, and then we had help from accounts payable on really understanding what their needs were. They weren't configuring the system. So we did that team, and then we had the person from Coupa, our project manager, who helped us on knowledge of how to configure the system, and brought in a Coupa resource for a week when we did actually get stuck on the integrations. Then after about 3 or 4 months, then we got the person from IT for 2 months, and expanded a little bit beyond that core team. But it was a very small core team of really about 3 people.
Okay, good. And you talked about the numbers about getting 300 suppliers onto the platform. So again, if you can just share a little bit about that experience.
Sure.
I imagine there probably was a bit of pushback, but because unfortunately there always is, to a greater or lesser degree. What level of pushback were you experiencing? You kind of touched on it a little bit at the top of this webinar, but what kind of pushback did you see, and how straightforward was it to get those 300 on board?
It was pretty straightforward because, we weren't inventing the wheel here, because e-procurement's been around since 2000, and we were kind of really late to the game in implementing it. So when I went to some of our larger vendors, our office supply vendor, it was Staples, and they had just acquired another company, and we were on their old software, and we were going to have to go to their new website. And so we just made that a part of it, was just saying, okay, we'll go to your new website, but that new website is going to become a punch-out catalog on Coupa. So we timed the project for that. So that one worked out really well. In fact, the office supply company trained many of my users. That's one of my tips at the end, but so I'll grab that now, which is for all the different locations we had, we didn't go out and train them. We did some webinars. We did a few online things, utilized our training department to some extent, but a lot of the users went to a class sponsored by the office supply company, and all the administrative assistants went to that, got free lunch, pens and pencils, and sticky notes, and learned how to get to the new Staples website. Well, in order to get to the Staples website, they had to learn how to use Coupa. So it's a very intuitive tool. So it was just a matter of, here's how you log in, click this, and then you hit this punch-out button here, and now you're at our Staples site. So utilizing vendors to do some of your training is I thought, one of the more clever things we came up with. The only place we got pushback was from suppliers that were really not web-enabled. We had a print and fulfillment supplier doing business cards, and they were not able to interact via CXML, and that one was really a battle with our print and fulfillment department because they wanted to use the supplier, and we spent way too much time trying to teach the supplier CXML. We went to a major computer supplier and told them we wanted to connect with them via a punch-out catalog, and I think it was done in an hour. They're like, okay, here's the web link. You're already on a custom website. Here's the link. Put it in. Does it work? Yes? Great. So mostly it was like that. We had about 8 or 10 punch-out catalogs when we went live, not a huge amount. And then the rest of the suppliers, we sent a note to saying, hey, by the way, the email you get now is going to have a different format for the purchase order.
I know that we've got some stats on the next slide. So shall we go ahead, Bryce, and have a look at some of the results?
Let's do that. Yes. One of the things we dealt with was the anxiety of the AP staff, because they saw this tool and they saw how efficient it was, and they were all worried for their jobs. And we had really 12 AP folks, and 3 of them were temps. So I knew I had some flexibility. But I went and I talked to them and I said, look, your job is going to change a lot. Today, you are keying in every single invoice that comes in. And when you're doing that, because you don't have a purchase order to match it to, you're keying in an invoice, all the fields. Your data entry clerks, your job is going to change, and you're now going to become detectives. You're not going to key data anymore because we're going to have that all scanned in, or it's going to come in through the network. So you're going to monitor the flow, and when something doesn't go through automatically, now you become a detective and start figuring out why didn't that work. And they said, all of you will still have jobs because of the company growth. And we knew that that was one luxury that we had, was we knew that we were going to continue to grow, and it was going to take a while to build the efficiencies. But with 12 AP staff on where we were and having to grow on a linear basis, we would have been up to 36 accounts payable staff if we were where we are today. And we're not. We're at 14. Actually, I take that back. That was last year's numbers. We probably would have been closer to 42 at this point in time if we'd been growing on a linear basis. And we're still at 14 because we continue to find more ways to do things on a more innovative basis and more efficient. So we're well over 300% efficiency gain just on the accounts payable staff. And not hiring those 30 people has more than paid for my P2P solution. So that's one of the more compelling numbers.
Very compelling indeed. And this kind of the business case that you set up originally when you got the approval to go ahead, or you agreed as a team to go ahead with Cooper,
right.
was that kind of those figures, the 12 today versus the 42 that you should have had, were those numbers that were crunched into your business plan, or did you maybe not have the kind of the foresight because you weren't sure on the acquisition plan?
I'd love to tell you I was that smart, but I wasn't. I was actually quite wrong in my business forecast, and also on some of the efficiencies of where I thought that we could take some costs out, but we weren't able to. And then where we gained some efficiencies were wildly better than what I had hoped for.
Let's pour over some other stats that we've got here that are also impressive, and then we'll move to a poll and then your last few slides.
Okay. I think the interesting part here is the scale. We're pushing through last year 12 billion, 13 billion in requisitions. Actually, that's actually total since we've implemented. We're now over 13 billion, 225,000 requisitions, and it's all very easy to access all in one system, but it's a robust enough system that we can push that kind of volume through it. And as we continue to grow, I have no worries that the system will be able to scale with us.
Great results. So now I believe we have our second and final poll question, so coming up on the screen now. So let's find out from you what percentage of your employee base have access to your requisitioning system today. Is it 1 to 10%, 11 to 30%, 31 to 50%, 51 to 80%, or is it more than 80%? If you do have any final questions, do post those through to me. We have been really asking questions that have been coming through from the audience as we've been going along, and we might have a couple of minutes right at the end for your questions. If we do not, I know that the Bryce and also Cooper will be very happy to come back to you. So do answer that poll, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on the screen now. So you can see, working up from the bottom this time, we've got 9% of you saying 51 to 80%, 13% of you 31 to 50%, 19% of you saying 11 to 30%, and 29% of you saying more than 80, and 31% of you saying under 10. So, interesting way of me going through that data analysis. I think the key takeaways there is that we've got under 40% of you actually having over 50% of your employee base having access to the requisition system. How do those figures kind of chime with you, Bryce?
100% of our employees have access to the system, but not everybody can get to everything. For instance, we do have an IT catalog, but there's a limited amount of people who can access the IT catalog. Everybody can access the office supply catalog, and if you fill in this slide, you'll see that we do a lot of other things in the procurement system other than just procurement requisitions. And the takeaway here is that folks come in and we have tuition reimbursement forms, because again, procurement wasn't the only thing with the paper-based problems. We had all HR did, and so we were able to solve some of their problems using our procurement system, because it's just workflow. But as of today, 40% of the requisitions rolling through our purchasing system are not for purchasing. Therefore, I need a company phone. I need a credit card. I needed to get an approval off for a volunteer day off. We even extended it for a year for our employee onboarding process. We've since now moved off of that, but it filled a gap for a year. So let's move on to the lessons learned. And one thing I would say is that make your procurement and payment process easier to use than to not use, because people will get frustrated if they can't get what they need, and they'll figure out a way to do it. So make it easier to go through the front door as opposed to making them go around to the sides. Close down the sides. That put your effort there and putting the barriers there, but make that front door big and wide so people can come through and at least get that data in the system. Like I said, we over time, all those check requisitions that were coming in were in our system, and as we had more bandwidth, then we were able to go to those users and said, hey, I see you submitted this check request for $100,000. Let me show you how to turn that into a purchase order. And then we moved that down to 75, and then we moved it down to 50, etc. But we could see it. So we had people coming into the system. We made it very easy to use, and then made it very hard to not use. That was the other power of having accounts payable and procurement together, is that when people were submitting check recs at a certain point, and we had our policy out there, and they said, hey, I went out and bought this thing, and we said, sorry, no, you didn't follow policy. You're not going to get reimbursed. And that was a big surprise to a lot of people. Another thing is to change your process and not the software. Our process was highly inefficient, and if we tried to pound our process into the software, we would had all kinds of customizations and then nightmares in upgrading. And we went to cloud-based, so we really couldn't even do that. But we did a bit of that in the ERP, and it just really failed miserably. So instead, in the cloud-based Coupa, we just followed what their process was and changed our internal processes to match that, and it worked out a lot better. And then building their team, procurement and accounts payable. I had the luxury of having a boss who was open-minded enough to say, great, let's put them together, but not everybody can. So one thing that we could do, and everybody can do, is we steal from each other and we grow people within the other organization. So accounts payable, I hire people from AP and bring them into procurement as analysts, as my labor manager, and any new associate buyer that starts at an entry-level buyer job starts in accounts payable, and they spend 3 months there. So people are learning the full process, and you have relationships back and forth from people that have worked with each other. So that's been very valuable. And then having shared goals, even if you're not in the same organization, having shared goals, because that you're not rewarded, you're not done until that vendor is paid. So those are some of the takeaways I think that are important.
Great. Okay. We are now moving to the last couple of questions. We've got just time for one or two more, and there's been a lot of questions that have come through more on the kind of the technical implementation and the kind of more technical details of all of this. So just if I can just try and see if I can get through as many of these as possible in the last couple of minutes. Now, is Coupa integrated with any type of capital project management system, or is the focus on MRO?
We use it just for MRO. Jessica, did you want to field that one?
Sorry, Susie, could you just repeat the question?
Sure. Is Coupa integrated with any type of capital project management system, or is its focus more on MRO?
Predominantly on indirects, but we do have some that we do have some customers that handle capital in Coupa as well.
Okay. To populate the rec, do you use primarily punch-out, catalogs, or write-ins?
The volume of requisitions is mostly punch-out because it's the office supplies. It's the simple things. We have internal catalogs. If somebody needs a computer, they don't go to our supplier. They go to, within IT. So the volume is punch-out, but the dollars are custom ones. So that's where we spend our time. So we try and, set people up for the vast majority to go through the punch-out, and then the buyers handle the manual ones.
And Maverick buying, we didn't necessarily touch on the Maverick buying levels. Have you got a view as to what they were like before and after this project?
I'd say that it was majority of Maverick buying going on before. And where we are today, it's a hard number because the dollars, at what point is procurement really involved in the process? If somebody's chosen their supplier and then they go to procurement and say, okay, here we go, I've chosen my supplier, now I'm ready to use procurement. Is that Maverick buying or not? So it's a little bit of gray, but it's certainly far improved from where we were.
Okay, good. Unfortunately, we are out of time. There have been a couple of people that have asked to see the interface, so I know that Jessica will follow up with you directly so that you can see the interface. And then there are a number of questions which are outstanding, so I know that Jessica will lead the responses on all of those. Ladies and gentlemen, just to draw your awareness of a couple of upcoming things that you should be notified on. We've got a number of webinars upcoming that absolutely should be in your diary, an exciting schedule ahead of us, and a couple of events as well that should be in your diary. Bryce, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story, and Jessica, thank you very much for your input too. Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you very much, and goodbye.